They say silence is golden. But silence, in my case, felt more like cement cold, heavy, and hardening around my chest the day my daughter texted me, "We're done here." I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd once cut her sandwich, crusts, and tied birthday balloons. The same table where I nursed her through heartbreak, through college applications, through motherhood. I stared at those 3 words glowing on my phone screen. "We're done here." My thumb hovered for a second, but I didn't hesitate long. I typed 2 words, "as you wish." Then I put the phone down, turned the kettle on, and watched it boil. My name is June Alder. And until that moment, I would have told you I was a mother before I was anything else. I was a wife for 51 years until cancer took Harold. The man could fix anything with 2 hands and a screwdriver, but he couldn't fix that. I buried him in the cemetery 2 blocks from the home we built together, back when walls were just drywall and dreams. After he passed, I thought my daughter Claire would pull closer. Instead, she pulled away. At first it was subtle, a missed call here, a forgotten invitation there. But grief makes you generous with excuses. I told myself she was busy. A mother herself now, with 2 wild boys and a husband who never remembered my birthday but always remembered to borrow my car. I helped, of course. That's what mothers do. Claire needed help with the kids after school. I was there, groceries running low. I stocked the fridge, laundry piling up. I folded until my knuckles ached. No one asked if I was tired, or lonely, or still grieving. I smiled through the silence. Because I thought love looked like sacrifice? There was one evening, rain pounding the windows, dinner simmering on Claire's stove when her oldest, Dylan, tripped and scraped his elbow. I rushed in with the first aid kit, soothed him like I always had, Claire snapped. Right there in front of the boys. "Mom, can you stop? You always do this. You swoop in like I'm not here." I froze. I was just helping. She shook her head, rolled her eyes. "You're always interfering." The words slid down my spine like ice water. That night, I packed up early, left the casserole in her fridge, and walked the 6 blocks home in the rain. No one texted to ask if I got in safe. A week later, the message came. "We're done here." Not a phone call, not a conversation. Just a sentence, clean and surgical. I stared at it, thought about replying, something cutting, something that would make her feel the sting of what she'd just said. But then, I didn't. I remembered all the times I'd told myself love required me to stay. But maybe love also meant letting go, so I typed, "as you wish." And I meant it. I made tea that night. Jasmine, the good kind. I never used because I was always saving it for guests. I sat in Harold's old recliner, wrapped in the blue quilt I'd stitched during my pregnancy with Claire, and I let it hurt. I let it rip open the truth I'd been hiding under politeness and casseroles, that I was no longer needed. And more painfully, no longer wanted. People think grief comes when someone dies, but I've learned it can also arrive quietly on a Tuesday, in a text message when your daughter decides the woman who gave her life no longer fits into hers. I was her mother, until I wasn't, but I'm still June, still breathing, still here, and for the first time in decades, I had no obligations to anyone, no school pickups, no last-minute grocery runs, no quiet swallowing of words that hurt, just silence, just me, and something about that, as terrifying as it was, felt like a beginning. The thing about silence is, it doesn't just arrive, it lingers. It presses its weight against every surface of your day, until even the hum of the refrigerator feels like company. After Claire's message, I waited. I thought maybe she'd cool down. Maybe Dylan or little Max would miss me and ask for grandma. Maybe her husband, useless in most ways, but decent with apologies, would step in. But no call came, no message. Not even a school picture in the mail. The space where my family had once lived in my life stayed empty. At first, I kept checking my phone habit, I suppose. Every hour or so, I'd glance at the screen, convinced I'd missed something, but it just sat there, quiet. By the end of the week, I turned it face down. By the end of the month, I stopped charging it at night. In the mornings, I'd make a cup of tea and sit by the window, watching the mail truck pull up. Some days I let the letters pile up on the table. The only thing I seemed to receive was advertisements and a few stray condolence cards still trickling in for Harold. I used to mark the boys' birthdays on the calendar, little gold stars. That calendar hung by the kitchen where I could see it every time I passed by, but by mid-March, I pulled it down and folded it shut. The house was too full of reminders, so I started to clean. The living room was first. I took down the handprint painting Dylan made in kindergarten, one red palm, one blue labeled "To Grandma, Love You Forever." I wrapped it in old newspaper and stored it in a plastic tub. I packed away Max's toy train set, He hadn't used it in months, but I'd kept it on the rug just in case. The fridge, once cluttered with spelling tests and sticky drawings, now gleamed like a blank slate, sterile, clean, like a hospital room that had already discharged its patient. I moved through the house like I was exorcising ghosts. Claire's wedding photo in the hallway. Gone. The throw pillow she gave me for Christmas, with Best Nana Ever stitched in gold, folded and stored. Even the guest bathroom, where the boys had left little bath toys behind, was scrubbed bare. I wasn't angry, at least. Not anymore. I just didn't want to sit in a museum of someone else's choices. One morning, while dusting the bookshelf, I spotted an old notebook, unused leather-bound, something Harold had gifted me years ago and I'd forgotten. I pulled it down, opened to the first page, and wrote, "My life, my turn." It felt good to see the words, to claim something, even if it was just ink. I didn't know what I was doing at first, but each day I filled a page. I made lists. My favorite meals. I never cooked any more places I always wanted to visit but never did. Books I pretended to like because Claire loved them. Words I never said to Harold, and the ones I never said to myself. Became a quiet ritual. Wake up, brew tea, write a single line, then another. Soon, I started another list. More practical. More permanent assets in my name. The house, fully paid. Deed. In my drawer savings account, modest. But enough. Harold's pension, jewelry for my mother. The car. Still running strong. A small lakefront cabin we'd once looked at but never bought. Now circled in a real estate magazine. I hadn't looked at my life this way before. I'd always seen what I'd given. Now I was looking at what I still had. It was strange, this peace. It wasn't happiness. Not yet, but it was something close. It was the quiet you feel when you finally take your shoes off after walking too far. When the ache of what's behind you is replaced by the stillness of finally sitting down. Every room in the house echoed. Now, but not with pain. With possibility. The silence didn't mock me anymore. It answered me, not with words, but with space, with breath, with a second chance, and I, for the first time in a long time, was ready to listen. I still remember the sound the front door made when Harold first carried me through it. It was a stubborn little creak in the hinges that never fully went away, a sound I used to love, a sound that meant home. But as I stood in that same doorway decades later, staring out at the empty street, it struck me just how long I'd been waiting inside a house that no longer welcomed me. I wasn't kicked out. I just finally realized I could leave. It started with a folder one afternoon. I pulled out every official document I could find. The deed, Harold's pension paperwork, our wills, my birth certificate. I spread it all across the dining table like a game of solitaire, and right there, stamped in ink, were the words, "Sole owner, June Alder." That house wasn't Claire's. It wasn't the boys' single quotes. It was mine. That realization hit me like sunlight. After a storm. The next day, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Harold's old friend from the VFW, Tom Mitchell. He still worked part-time out of a dusty little office downtown, surrounded by war medals and tax codes. When I walked in, he blinked like he'd seen a ghost. "June, haven't seen you since Harold's service?" We chatted politely before. I laid the papers on his desk. "I want to sell the house," I said, calm and direct, "and I want to make sure everything's clean and quiet." Tom looked up, curious. "Family, okay with this?" "My name's on the deed," I replied, folding my hands. "That's all the approval I need." He nodded once. "Fair enough." The process moved faster than I expected. Tom handled most of the legwork, and within a week, I had a list of interested buyers. But before I made any decisions, I needed to breathe. To feel something other than old wallpaper and bitter memories, so I packed a small bag, filled the car with gas, and left the driveway without telling a soul. The road curled through golden fields and sleepy towns, the kind Harold and I used to drive through in autumn just to see the leaves change. I passed antique shops, orchards, bakeries with handwritten signs, places where people waved just because you were there. I didn't have a destination, just a direction. Away. By the second day, I stopped in a lakeside town I barely remembered the name of. It smelled like pine and wood smoke. The air was crisp, like it had been waiting for someone to notice how fresh it was. I pulled into a small real estate office by the main street. The sign above the door read, "Hemlock, Realty, Homes with Heart." It felt quaint, hopeful. Inside sat a woman in her early 40s, blonde braid over one shoulder. A mug that said "Coffee first, client second." Just kidding, mostly. She looked up and smiled like I was already someone looking for something cozy. She asked, her tone warm, "Or are you just running away from something loud?" I chuckled. Maybe a little of both. And in one afternoon, she made me feel more seen than my own daughter had in years. We visited 3 places. All charming, all wrong, too small, too dark, too close to neighbors. Then she drove me up a gravel hill that opened into a clearing. At the end of the path sat a single-story cottage, its porch wrapped in ivy, a swing hanging gently from a crooked beam. The lake shimmered behind it, wide, still, silver dot inside. It smelled like cedar and old pages. The kitchen had a window that looked directly at the water. The bedroom had faded floral curtains and a built-in bookshelf. The kind of home that didn't ask anything of you but your presence. "I don't know," I whispered. "It just feels quiet." Miriam didn't push. Sometimes quiet is the best, yes. That night I slept at a roadside inn, and I dreamed for the first time in months. Not of Claire, not of loss, but of soft wind and porch swings and tea kettles steaming in peace. By morning, I'd made my decision. The sale of my family home went through with minimal fuss. Tom handled the closing. I never told Claire, never left a note, never explained, because she told me we were done and I believed her. Let her find out through the grapevine. Let her drive by one day and see the for sale sign gone, replaced by a new mailbox. A new name she doesn't recognize. That house saw my sacrifice, my silence. It didn't take much, just boxes of what was mine alone. A chair Harold loved, my books, my music, the blue quilt. Miriam met me at the cottage with a spare set of keys. "I stocked the fridge," she said, smiling. "Hope you like blackberry, jam, and local gossip." I laughed genuinely when she left. I stood in the center of my new home and listened. There was no tension, no footsteps above, no voices demanding, needing, diminishing. Just whined through the trees, birdsong in the distance, and a woman finally standing. In a space that belonged to her, I wasn't kicked out. I walked out, and for the first time in my life, I walked toward something that was mine. The first missed call came on a Wednesday morning. I was rearranging the bookshelf in my new cottage, placing fiction on one shelf, poetry on another, when the phone buzzed once on the counter. "Claire, no." Message. "No follow, dash up. Just a missed call." I stared at the screen for a moment. Then I pressed the side button and let it fade to black. I imagined she must have driven to the house that morning. Maybe with the boys in the back seat and her usual iced coffee in the cup holder. Maybe she pulled into the familiar driveway expecting me to answer the door, to hug the children, to pretend like that message never happened. Instead, she found an empty porch. The swing was gone, the flower beds uprooted, and a small white sign stuck into the lawn. "Sold. Thank you for welcoming our next chapter." The next call came that afternoon. Then a third later that night. No voicemails, just quiet attempts, like someone unsure how to dial back the words they thought would never echo. Meanwhile, my new life unfolded with a kind of gentle rhythm that felt foreign at first. Each morning I made tea and opened the windows. The lake mist rolled in soft as breath, curling around the porch railings like an old friend coming to sit a while. I filled the space not with people but with presence, with me. Books lined every ledge. I found myself reading slowly again, savoring each line like dessert. I framed a few old photos, me and Harold at the state fair. Our wedding day, a silly one of us wearing matching gardening hats. But I didn't hang anything else from the past. What didn't come with me didn't belong here in town. I joined a local women's circle that met every Thursday at the library. We called it the Second Bloom Society. No one asked what brought us there. They just passed around tea and offered laughter like it was currency. There was Carol, who left her husband at 70 because he talked more to his golf clubs than to her. There was Nadine, whose adult son forgot her birthday 5 years in a row. She threw herself a masquerade and invited strangers instead. And then there was Majune Alder, who once lived quietly in the shadow of someone else's needs. Now, learning how to take up space, the calls kept coming. 10, then 23. By the second week, the counter on my phone read 38 missed calls. Still no voicemail. No apology. Just silence wrapped in desperation. But I had learned something about silence. It wasn't punishment, it was protection. I decorated my cottage with succulents in teacups and stacks of worn novels. I filled mason jars with wildflowers. I played Billie Holiday on Saturday afternoons and danced barefoot in the kitchen with no audience but the breeze. I bought a bird feeder and named the blue jay who visited every morning Mr. Harold. He was bossy and loud, just like the real one. Night, I lit candles and sat by the lake, wrapped in the blue quilt. I wrote in my journal the one titled, "My Life, My Turn." Some entries were soft. Today, I smiled without guilt. Some were sharp. She called me a burden, but she never once asked what I was carrying. Some were free. I didn't leave her. She let me go, and I just finally believed her by the end of the month. The call count had reached 52 one evening. My phone buzzed again while I was clipping rosemary from my porch planter. I didn't even glance this time. Instead, I hummed to myself. A song. Harold used to sing off-key, something about second chances and roads not taken. Claire once said I was interfering, that I made her feel watched, judged, suffocated. But the truth is, she only ever saw me when I was useful as a babysitter, as a wallet, as someone to absorb her bad moods without protest. She didn't see me as a person now, standing barefoot on my own porch. I felt more like a person than I had in years. I hadn't just sold the house. I'd sold the narrative that I didn't matter unless I was needed. When I returned to my journal that night, I added a new section. Things I'm not anymore. A backup plana. Placeholder a guilt. Sponge a ghost in my own life. Claire once called me a burden, but now, in the soft quiet of my new home, with my hands in the dirt, my name on the mailbox, enjoy. Blooming slowly like spring after frost, I finally understood the truth. I was never the weight. I just finally set it down. There's a kind of ache that doesn't scream. It just lingers low in the bones, familiar as your own shadow. That's what motherhood became for me in the later years. Not the joyful giving it once was, not the nursery rhymes and scraped knees and whispered lullabies, but a kind of invisible bleeding, quiet, constant, expected. Because when you give everything, no one remembers you had anything to begin with. I sat on the porch one evening, journal in my lap, a mug of tea gone lukewarm beside me. The lake shimmered with the last light of day, calm and unbothered. I watched a heron take flight, slow and deliberate, like it knew exactly when to stop waiting. My phone buzzed inside the house again. It had been weeks since Claire first called. One missed call, then two, then a ripple, then a storm. Now the number read 79.70-9 attempts. To undo a sentence that took her 5 seconds to send, "We're done here." At first she didn't leave messages, just the blank record of her reaching. But somewhere around call 35 the voicemails began. I listened to the first few, curled on the sofa one night, like an old habit I wasn't ready to quit. "Mom, you sold the house. Why would you do that without telling me? The boys keep asking where you are. I don't know what to tell them. Can you please just call me back? This isn't okay." The shift came around voicemail number 12. Her tone grew sharper, less wounded, more familiar. "This isn't how family acts. You're being cruel." "So what? You're punishing me now? After everything I've done? You're abandoning your grandkids. Do you know how selfish that is?" There it was, the old music. The guilt disguised as concern. The blame disguised as love. My quilt was folded neatly at the end of the sofa. The light through the windows was soft and gold. I looked around at my life, and then I looked back at my phone. No, I wouldn't let her voice fill this space. Not anymore. I opened the voicemail folder and pressed delete one by one. Not out of spite, but out of protection, because I knew what came next, the whiplash from pain to power. From "I miss you too, how dare you." I'd lived it before. Every time I set a boundary, she knocked it down. Every time I asked for space, she made it a rejection. Every time I said no, she twisted it into "you never loved me enough." It hadn't always been that way. There were good years, but even in childhood, Claire had a sharpness, a way of making you feel guilty just for breathing differently than she wanted. I remember her at 15, because I wouldn't let her stay out past midnight at 25. She told me I was hovering when I offered to help with the baby at 32. She rolled her eyes when I asked if she was eating enough during her second pregnancy. I thought, that's just how daughters are, but now I know. Love shouldn't feel like holding your breath, so I deleted every voicemail, and when the phone buzzed again, number 80, I turned it off entirely and placed it in the drawer by the window. Some bridges don't burn, they dissolve. Quietly, slowly, like paper soaking through with rain, until one day there's nothing left to walk back on. That night, I lit a candle and sat by the window. The stars were out, the lake was glass, and I reached for my journal. But instead of writing in it, I pulled out a sheet of parchment and uncapped an old fountain pen. One Harold had given me on our 30th anniversary. I didn't write a reply. I wrote a goodbye. "Dear Claire, you didn't lose me. You let me go. You drew the line. You packed the silence, and I just stepped into it. I spent decades being your yes. I smiled when I was tired. I gave when I had nothing left. I was your ride, your babysitter, your freezer filler, your silence keeper, and the one time I needed room to breathe, you called it betrayal. This isn't revenge, it's release. I don't hate you, but I've finally learned to love myself more than the guilt you gave me. I hope the boys grow kind. I hope you grow soft. But most of all, I hope you learn that not every closed door is a punishment. Sometimes, Mom, I folded the letter and placed it in a box beneath my bed. Not to send, but to say what I needed to say. Without needing to be heard, she didn't lose me. She made the choice to end something sacred. And now, something honest, there's a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, it feels earned. That was the air in my cottage. Now, no slamming doors, no raised voices, just the rustle of wind through ivy and the low hum of Billie Holiday on my record player. Peace didn't arrive like a grand gesture. It came in the details, the soft click of my teacup on a saucer, the scent of fresh rosemary from my windowsill, the creak of the porch swing I'd hung with my own hands. It tasted like warm tea and no apologies. On a Saturday afternoon, I hosted my first gathering, not the kind where you worry about dust on the baseboards, or whether your roast is dry, the kind where you wear your coziest cardigan and nobody minds if your cat jumps on the table. The women from the second arrived one by one. Carol brought almond biscuits. Nadine carried a bouquet of wildflowers, and Bee showed up with 2 kinds of jam because she couldn't decide. We sat on the porch in the late autumn sun, sipping tea and talking about everything and nothing. Ex-husband's books. How the younger grocery clerk keeps calling us ma'am like it's a funeral. We laughed until we cried. The good kind. Of crying, the kind that makes your ribs ache and your spirit feel rinsed clean. I hadn't laughed like that in years. Not politely, not out of obligation, but from somewhere, deep in my belly. The place that had been quiet for far too long. That evening, after everyone had gone home, I curled into my favorite chair with a bowl of lentil soup. I'd made it just for me. Not to impress, not to portion out for a family that never thanked me just because it was what I wanted. It's funny how radical that can feel after a lifetime of catering to others. When I opened the mailbox the next morning, or catalogs, what I found instead was a small pink envelope addressed in shaky handwriting. No return address, no fanfare, just my name. Inside was a folded sheet of notebook paper written in pencil. The letters were large and crooked but careful, the kind of handwriting that takes effort. Hi, Grandma. Mom doesn't know I'm writing this. She told me not to, but I wanted to say, I miss you. I know something happened. I heard her crying once. I don't think it's your fault. I liked your house. I liked the cookies. I liked when you let me stay up past bedtime to read. I hope you're okay. If you want to write me back, you can send it to my friend's house. Her mom said, it's okay, love. Dylan, my hands trembled as I read it again. I pictured his gap-toothed smile, the way he used to beg for just one more story, the way he clung to my leg when his mom was in a mood. It was a small letter, but it held the weight of something sacred, something that hadn't been twisted by adult disappointment or pride. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a seed. I didn't write back, not because I didn't want to, but because I'd learned that not every call deserves an answer, and sometimes, the most loving thing you can give someone is time to grow without forcing it. Instead, I added the letter to my scrapbook. On the cover I'd written, proof of life. Inside were pages of clipped poems, pressed flowers, scribbled recipes, and memories I'd gathered since walking away. Not from family, but from the version of myself who thought being needed was the same thing as being loved. I taped the letter into a new section and titled it, They'll Know When They're Ready. That night, I lit a candle and sat by the lake, journal in my lap. I wrote, today. I didn't miss the old life. I missed the boy, not the strings attached, and I'm allowed to hold on to love. Without returning to the fire it came from, I sleep. Better now, the tea always tastes just right. The quiet doesn't press. Anymore it lifts. And for the first time in decades, I don't need to be forgiven or invited or explained. I simply am, and that's the piece no one ever handed me, so I brewed it myself. The sun was sinking low over the lake, brushing gold across the water like a quiet apology for the day. I sat on the wooden bench Harold built the year after we moved in, the one that faced the water, worn smooth by time and weather, and thought. My journal lay open in my lap, pen uncapped, but I hadn't written a word, not because I had nothing to say, but because, for the first time, there was no urgency, no ache to explain myself, no one to perform for, just the soft rustling of trees. Steady and real, peace had become my companion now, not loud, not dramatic, but consistent. Like the tick of the grandfather clock Harold had once repaired with glue and prayer, and then I heard it tires. On gravel. Too slow to be passing, too deliberate to be a stranger, I didn't turn around. I knew footsteps followed. Hesitant, familiar, crunching across the grass with the same rhythm I remembered from when she used to sneak in past curfew as a teenager, hoping I was asleep. Claire, she stopped a few feet behind me. Mom? I didn't speak. She came closer, shoes sinking into the soft earth by the bench. Mom, please. Still, I stayed quiet because silence, I've learned, has its own power. One I never let myself hold. When I was too busy filling the space with apologies and baked goods, she finally sat beside me. Not close, but not far. I glanced sideways. She looked older, tired, hair pulled back like she hadn't had time to care. There was something crumpled in her, like the edges of her had started to fold under the weight of her own choices. She stared at the lake. "I didn't know you moved," she said quietly. "I know," I replied. "I went by the house. It felt wrong, empty. It's someone else's now." Claire looked down. "You didn't tell me. You told me we were done." She blinked hard. "I didn't mean it." I nodded gently. "You rarely did, but you always said it anyway." She opened her mouth, closed it again. A bird called in the distance, sharp and sudden, cutting through the heavy pause. Claire sniffed. "I didn't come to fight. I miss you. The boys miss you." I turned to look at her fully now. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her shoulders stiff like she was bracing for a storm she knew she started. "I don't hate you, Claire," I said softly. "I never have." She let out a breath like she'd been holding it for years. "But I'm not going back," I added. Her head snapped up. "What?" "I'm not returning to that version of us, of me, the one where I'm a convenience, a backup, a shadow." Her face fell. "I never saw you that way." "No," I interrupted, still calm. "You didn't see me at all." There was no venom in my voice, no shaking, no grand confrontation, just the quiet gravity of truth, the kind that doesn't shout because it no longer needs to convince. "You didn't just throw me away," I continued. "You taught me I could stand alone, that I deserved to." She started crying then. Not the messy, dramatic kind, but the quiet weeping of someone who realizes the damage wasn't in one blow, but in 1,000 small cuts they never thought would scar. "I was overwhelmed," she whispered. "I didn't know how to ask for help without making it a demand. Gave you everything I had, Claire. My time, my strength, my softness. I even gave you the silence when your words stung, but I forgot to keep any of it for myself." We sat in that stillness for a while. She looked out at the lake again. "So that's it. You're just done." I smiled gently. "I'm not angry. I'm just finished." She closed her eyes. "I don't know what to do with that." "You don't have to do anything," I said. "That's the difference now." Claire reached into her pocket, pulled out a folded photo. "Dylan drew this for you. He didn't know how to send it. He keeps asking where you are." I took the picture. A simple crayon sketch, stick figures by a lake, a little house with smoke curling from the chimney. In the corner, written in block letters, "Grandma's new home." It cracked something open in me, not pain, not guilt, something lighter, love unburdened. I tucked the drawing into my journal, not as an invitation, a reminder that love could still live, even if I didn't step back into the fire. Claire stood slowly. "If I call, sometime will you answer?" I looked at her. "If you call without expectations, without old patterns, just as a daughter wanting to talk, not as someone who needs something, then maybe," she nodded, wiping her eyes. I watched her walk back toward the car, shoulders curled slightly inward, like someone stepping carefully into unfamiliar ground. And when she drove away, I didn't feel empty. I felt whole. I opened my journal and turned to a new page, wrote in smooth ink. She told me we were done, so I finished the chapter and started my own book. If this story stirred something in you, a memory, a truth, a moment you haven't said out loud, share it in the comments. Have you ever had to walk away from family to find yourself again? Tell us your story. Like, if you believe peace is worth protecting, subscribe for more emotional journeys, quiet power, and voices that finally speak. Because sometimes silence is the loudest thing you'll ever say.